You know that feeling when you start speaking a foreign language and pronunciation just seems to be the worst part? The sounds don't feel comfortable in your mouth, like they don't belong there. The movements feel awkward, and you just keep slipping back into the patterns of your mother tongue. So you decide to take a course specifically on pronunciation to learn how to pronounce the sounds and to make it easier to speak that language. After you finish the course, you understand how to pronounce those sounds, but your speech organs still won't follow the instructions, which makes it even more frustrating. After a while, you get used to it and your accent gets better and more consistent, especially when you practice on your own. But when you have to have an actual conversation with someone, you're back to square one and your native accent seeps through. It seems impossible to control it. Does this all sound familiar? Why is it so hard to control your pronunciation and to change your accent? In this video, I'm going to lay out some principles of the neuroscience behind pronunciation training. Now, I have to make an important disclaimer that I am no neuroscientist. I am a specialist in British English pronunciation and a non-native pronunciation coach. I've done my share of research and I'd love to offer some insight into this narrow topic. I hope it helps you choose the right approach for effective learning and reassures you that there's nothing wrong with you if you struggle. To begin with, let's discuss how the pronunciation of your mother tongue is formed in your brain. You might assume that children develop their accents when they first start speaking, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, as early as the first months of your life, your brain starts mapping out the vowels and consonants of your mother tongue. During that time, the brain is sensitive to any language in the world. That is because the baby's brain overproduces neural networks, twice as many as it's going to need, in order to be prepared for any possibility. The brain is capable of perceiving and distinguishing any phonemes of any language. So, whatever language or languages the baby is exposed to early in life, the brain will build a neural network corresponding to that language. That network will be based on the sounds and sound contrasts that the baby hears during the first months of their life, the rhythm and intonation patterns that are relevant in that linguistic environment, and by contrast, whatever doesn't seem relevant or useful in that particular environment won't form part of that system. That sensitive period closes at around 12 months, and that's pretty amazing, isn't it? That by the time you're 1 year old, you've already formed the pronunciation system of your mother tongue. And after that, the brain becomes insensitive or deaf to other phonemes and other contrasts in other languages. So we perceive a foreign language through the filter of our mother tongue. It basically means that we hear and say only what already exists in this neural network in the pronunciation system of our mother tongue. I've got a pretty good example from my practice as a pronunciation coach, where I was teaching the British trap vowel, which is present in words like cat, happy, language, and I was teaching it to a student whose mother tongue is Russian, and in Russian this vowel doesn't exist. And so as the student was grappling with what it's like to say the sound, what it sounds like, and she was trying to put it into the familiar category to label it as one of the sounds that she already knows. And so she was like, I don't get it. Is it like Russian air, like happy, or is it like more like Russian ah, like happy? But the thing is that it's neither, it's happy. And to form this new concept in your brain, to form the new image of that sound in your brain is challenging. It takes extra effort before you can start practicing it and imitating it. You just have to kind of learn to hear it and perceive it differently from what your brain already knows. Other examples could include the contrast between th and s or the and z that don't exist in Russian, and Russian speakers who are just starting to learn English could be confused and could hear and say things like I think or I sink without really hearing any difference. And if we take Spanish speakers, a common blind spot for them is the difference between v and b. So words like very and berry will sound identical to them. And I haven't had any Japanese students, but I've heard that in Japanese, there's no contrast between r and l. It's just non-existent. So when they say right or light, it's difficult for them to tell them apart. Let me know in the comments what your mother tongue is and perhaps some of those examples of the contrasts that don't exist in your language. I'd be very curious to know. So I hope you get an idea about how deeply ingrained and consolidated your native accent is. Now, the good news is that you can still change your accent in a foreign language even if you're older than 12 months. We owe it to the brain's neuroplasticity. The adult brain is still capable of rewiring, it just usually happens more slowly and consciously than the child's brain. What I feel can really help an adult learner improve their pronunciation in a foreign language is understanding the neuroscience behind it, exactly how your brain is going to do that, and adjusting your approach accordingly. The first essential premise that I want you to understand is that pronunciation is not intellectual knowledge. It's a sensory motor skill. It means that you can't just learn it and change it by reading about it and memorizing that information. You have to develop complex neural connections between hearing, voice control, articulation, timing, and sensory feedback. That is to say, it's a really complex process that involves different parts of your brain and different parts of your body. It all has to be coordinated at the same time and automated enough so that you can also think about what you're saying when you pronounce things. In its complexity, it's unlike learning anything else. We could potentially compare it with other sensory motor activities like dancing or playing a musical instrument. So when we learn to dance, we learn to control our body, and we have to combine hearing, movement, balance, rhythm. When we play a musical instrument, pretty much the same thing. We mostly use our arms and fingers. And if we just compare sort of the superficial complexity of those skills, if you think about controlling your body or your arms and fingers, you already have a pretty good control over them. I'm sure you can do so many things with them. When it comes to pronunciation training, very often we don't have any conscious control over our organs of speech. So it can be extremely difficult to just get to feel how your tongue is positioned inside your mouth. You've never really thought about it because in your mother tongue, you don't have to control your pronunciation consciously. The sounds just come out. So even the first step of getting to feel the instruments that you're going to use for pronunciation training is a challenge in itself. And besides that, pronunciation is a tool to express our thoughts. So when you speak, you have to think about what you're saying. And in case of a foreign language, you also have to think about which words to use, what grammar to choose, and everything else. So it's an extremely overloaded cognitive activity, right? It's not just movement, and it's not just playing something that you've learned and practiced many times. You have to adjust to whatever you have to say whilst controlling your articulation and pronunciation. So it's an extremely demanding cognitive activity. I can't think of anything else so neurologically complex, so demanding, and just so difficult. So for all this to work, you have to automate your pronunciation enough so that you don't have to focus on it and you can think about what you're saying. Later in this video, we'll discuss how exactly you can do that. Now let's talk about what happens in the brain when you retrain your pronunciation. Now remember that neural network that you built before you turned 1 year old, those patterns for your mother tongue. By the time you're an adult, those neural connections are extremely strong and fossilized. They're automatic, they feel effortless and comfortable. You don't have to think about your pronunciation in your mother tongue, it all comes naturally. When it comes to new neural connections that you're trying to build when you change your accent, they are weak and fragile. They feel awkward and uncomfortable, and they take a lot of effort. We could picture it as a metaphor. It's a very common one, but I'm going to refer to it as well. So an old automated pathway in your brain is like a well-trodden path in the woods. You have walked this path thousands of times, so it feels fast, effortless, and automatic. You don't have to think about the steps you take or even the route you take. It just takes you to wherever you want to go. And in the meantime, you can even do something else like talk, look around, enjoy the forest. But when you try to change your pronunciation, it's like you're trying to build a completely new trail through a dense forest. At first, it's difficult. There are branches, roots, overgrown plants in the way. The path is narrow, unstable, and easy to lose. It's hardly even there. And the brain is competing between the old automated pathway and the new fragile pathway. What do you think the brain prefers? Naturally, the brain will fall back onto the familiar route because it's easier and more efficient. But every time you consciously practice the new pronunciation, it's like taking that new trail over and over again. Even though it's difficult and for your brain it doesn't make a lot of sense. Look, we've got this really clear and convenient path. Why would we take a different one? But every time you do it, gradually, the trail becomes wider and clearer and easier to follow, until it eventually starts feeling automatic too. So that is the only way you can really change your pronunciation, by rewiring your brain. And that can only happen through repeated activation of the new neural connections over an extended period of time. I hope it all explains the process a bit better and makes you understand that there's no possible magic pill, no quick crash course that you can take and change your accent forever. This is not how the brain works. So don't fall for those marketing ploys of change your accent in a week. This is just not feasible. So let's discuss the factors that contribute to our learning and rewiring of our brain. We're going to begin with the 4 pillars of learning according to a French neuroscientist, Stanislas Dehaene. And then I'm going to add 3 more factors specifically for pronunciation training. Now, the first pillar of learning is attention. It may seem quite obvious, but let's get to the bottom of how exactly it adds to the equation and why it matters for pronunciation training. So our attention is limited. It's like a spotlight. We can only really consciously focus on one thing at a time. The rest escapes our attention. And whenever we multitask successfully, it means that one or both processes have been automated enough not to compete for our conscious attention. We can think of the examples of successful multitasking like walking and talking. You don't have to think about how you walk. You can talk in the meantime. Or driving and talking. Here you can think about your experience if you're a driver. Before the skill is automated, you have to give it your full attention. You have to be concentrated. You can't just be talking or, I don't know, listening to music or singing or anything like that. You have to be fully in it. But once the skill has been automated, your hands know what to do. You don't really have to think about every movement, and you can be a bit distracted by other things. And one more instance of successful multitasking could be, for example, cooking and listening to a podcast. So your cooking procedures have been more or less automated and your mind can wander and be elsewhere. So when it comes to pronunciation, normally that's the activity that is automated or supposed to be automated, like in our mother tongue, so that we can focus on the meaning and the word choice, not on how we move our organs of speech. However, when you start changing your accent and you have to control all of those movements, your attention will be focused on that process, not on what you're saying. So it's entirely natural and part of the process that your fluency will drop because, again, our attention is limited. So there's only one thing that you can focus on at a time. The tips that I could give here is, firstly, slow down. If you have to practice something pronunciation-wise, you have to give it your full attention, not speed up, not try to make it seem fluent. You're not ready yet, so embrace it and focus on the movements that you're trying to control. Exaggerating the movements slightly when you first start could also be a good idea that can help the brain to perceive the differences better. Knowing that you can't really speak as quickly as before when you change your pronunciation, you can really make use of the activities that don't involve thinking. Like you can read something out loud just for the sake of practice, focusing only on your pronunciation in the process. Keep that in mind and be understanding and patient with yourself. If you have to speak to somebody and your accent slips up, that is entirely fine, and it's really difficult to do anything about it. Just give it time and more practice. And the final tip I'd like to give here is direct your attention to different aspects of pronunciation, meaning that, for example, if you're practicing a certain sound, focus, of course, on how it sounds, the acoustic properties of it, then how it feels in the mouth. What can you feel? What contact? If the mouth is open or closed, how are your lips positioned? And also the visuals can help a lot. So try to practice with a mirror or with a camera, controlling how everything looks. Approaching the learning process from those different perspectives can help the brain to grasp it better and to form a better idea of what it is that you're trying to learn. There's no bigger driver for learning than curiosity. When you're genuinely interested in something, you'll find it easier to pay attention, stay focused, and consistent. Active learners are also more efficient in their learning. If we think about the approach to pronunciation, an active learner is likely to repeat what they hear, try things out, pay attention to what they hear in the speech of others, make hypotheses, test them, ask questions, and all of that contributes to better learning, driven by that curiosity, passion, and internal motivation. And when it comes to motivation, it's really important as well. Understanding why you need it, what benefit will it give you, what's driving you. As Stanislas Dehaene writes it in his book, motivation is essential. We learn well only if we have a clear goal and we fully commit to reaching it. So if you're not really interested, or if you're not sure why you need it, your brain will invent thousands of ways of evading this pointless activity of pronunciation training. So check with yourself, what is it that drives you, what motivates you, what you're hoping to get from it. Answering those questions and being honest with yourself can set something straight and help you figure out what drives you. Let's face it, nobody likes to make mistakes and get corrected on them, but making mistakes is inherent and natural to learning. If you think about it, whatever we learn from the very beginning of our lives is through making a hypothesis, testing it, getting some feedback and error corrections from the outside world, and adjusting our approach accordingly. And this is how we learn, by trial and error. We learn through mistakes. So this is the way you learn how to walk, and this is the way you learn how to speak your mother tongue. Now imagine if you were a drama queen about every mistake that you make, and you decided that you don't want to do it again because it's not working out for you. Apparently you're not meant to do that. This is nonsense. And when people say that, oh, well, I'm not very good at languages, that's not true, because everyone's brain is hardwired to learn languages. And so just remember that making mistakes is part of the process, and every mistake, every inaccuracy that gets corrected should be cherished and embraced, because that's what gets you closer to your goal. Accepting this truth and changing your attitude to mistakes is one of the most important things you can do in learning. So in such a complex process of changing your accent in a foreign language, you simply cannot expect to get it right from the very first attempt. You just have to get constructive feedback and adjust your approach. A lot of students get frustrated if they can't get a sound right from the very first attempt, say after watching the video with an explanation and then trying it out for the very first time in their lives. But, you're not supposed to. You cannot expect to get it right from the very first attempt. You're meant to get feedback and adjust, and this is meant to happen multiple times. So this is entirely part of the process of changing your pronunciation, improving step by step by making mistakes, getting corrected, trying again, making more mistakes, and saying, yay, I'm getting somewhere. Besides, as we established before, we perceive foreign languages through the filter of our mother tongue. And so sometimes we can't really hear others or ourselves objectively. And in that case in particular, having someone to give you feedback is a precious opportunity. Working with a pronunciation coach, especially if you're at the beginning of your journey, is the most reliable way to reshape your accent, because they can also train you to hear the differences better, all of those nuances of sounds, and increase your awareness. And you should be very careful working on your accent on your own, because you run the risk of repeating the same inaccurate patterns and consolidating them, because we cannot only rely on our own ability to hear things when we're not trained for it. We might just hear the wrong thing. And something that I tell my students when they take my courses with a coach is that you shouldn't see your coach as an examiner. You shouldn't be afraid of submitting your tasks and getting corrected and feeling like you failed. The idea of this whole work with a coach is to see them as a guide and as the person who can tell you what you might be missing. So it's not like you have to drill something for hours and then submit it to your coach and get a mark, like whether or not you've done well, but it's more like you give it a go, you try it out, and the coach is your mirror that will reflect back on what's good and what needs to be corrected. So my point here is that feedback is essential, and it's the part of learning, it's the process. It's not like the final assessment, and it's not like you have to impress anyone. So getting that mindset right is also a very important element of successful learning. Learning and rewiring of your pronunciation happens not only during the active phase of your practice, but also when you sleep. Sleep is an essential element in consolidating learning. This is how it works. During sleep, your brain replays what you've learned during the day and decides whether it's useful or not. Should it be kept and strengthened, or should it be chucked away? And this is where the frequency of your practice comes into play. Imagine the brain has to decide, is this pattern important enough to keep? And for example, if you practice not so regularly and just do it once a week, once every 2 weeks, the brain will see this pattern is only activated once in a blue moon, so it's probably not that important and we don't have to strengthen it. But if you practice daily and you repeatedly activate those neurons, the brain will deem those connections useful and will strengthen them. With time, those circuits will become so consolidated that this skill will become automatic. Your pronunciation will get faster, more stable, less conscious, and more automatic. You can see how it's a two-way process. If you repeatedly activate the new pathways, they will further get strengthened by your brain every night when you sleep. Because your behavior signals to the brain, this pattern is useful and important and we need to strengthen and consolidate it. If, on the other hand, your practice is sporadic and random, sleep won't work wonders either. And because of that property of sleep, you may also find it easier to pronounce something the next day. You know that feeling when sometimes you try something and it's not working out and it's really hard and you get tired. So stop the drilling, go to sleep, and the next day, after a good night's sleep, you'll find it easier to do the same thing. So these are the 4 pillars of learning that can be applied to any skill that you're trying to learn. And I'm going to add 3 more factors and recommendations specifically for pronunciation training. As we discussed in the previous sections, it's essential for effective learning to get error feedback and to repeatedly activate the new neural connections. So I'd like to kind of reframe and summarize those 2 aspects in how they can be applied specifically to pronunciation training and give you some tips on your approach. So first off, you want to make sure that what you're training is accurate, because you don't want to strengthen the wrong pathways. So getting feedback, getting corrected multiple times is really helpful. And secondly, you want to make sure that you practice frequently. So accurate and frequent repetition is key to changing your pronunciation. Now, how to make sure that your practice follows those principles? Of course, if you have the opportunity to work with a coach, that is the best scenario, but I would recommend, rather than taking 1 lesson per week where you practice together, having daily short interactions. This is the approach that I use on my course, where communication is asynchronous. First, the student watches a pre-recorded video with the explanation of a certain sound. Then they send their attempt to the coach replies with any corrections, the student submits their corrections with another attempt, and so on. So this way, you can make sure that the practice is accurate because you get feedback. And secondly, you can keep practicing repeatedly throughout the week, not just once a week for 60 minutes. If you don't have an opportunity to work with a coach, try to still find ways of giving yourself feedback. Record your practice, compare it against the model, try to analyze it, slow down, pay attention to your articulation, how it looks, how it sounds. It can be really difficult. It's not for everyone, but try to do the most you can to fulfill the function of error feedback by yourself. The next point kind of expands on the previous one, that short daily sessions are much more effective than a long marathon once or twice a week. Ideally, that could be 20-40 minutes daily, sometimes more, sometimes less. And if you feel like you're not managing to practice today, you could just do, I don't know, repeat a few words, take 5 minutes to repeat them while you do the dishes or something else. Even that would be better than nothing, because the more frequently you activate those neurons, the better the connections will get. I know that committing to daily practice can be daunting and barely possible for most of us with our busy lives, with many things that need to be done, but trying to assess how much time can you spend daily and putting it into your calendar, maybe trying to build this habit around another habit that you have. I don't know, maybe practicing every day after breakfast or lunch before you get too tired in the evening, or while you're waiting in the parking lot to pick up your kids from school, stuff like that. Finding that little slot, it could be just 15 minutes, is way better than nothing. And if you manage to cut out daily or near daily slots for pronunciation training, that will really go a long way. It's infinitely more effective than doing one long session, 2-hour session at the weekend. You may be tempted to say, my week is so busy, I'm just going to practice at the weekend and cram all my practice into 2 or 3 hours and send it to my coach. Now, apart from being an ineffective approach to learning, what you might be doing is making it worse. Because the thing is that after around 40 minutes of focused pronunciation training, your brain will inevitably get tired and you will start slipping up and making mistakes. Your accuracy and attention drop, and you might start consolidating the wrong pathways. And we don't want that to happen, do we? So at best, you're wasting your time, and at worst, you're consolidating the wrong patterns. To sum up this section, first, make sure that you're drilling the right thing, that you're practicing the accurate patterns. And second, try to make your practice short and frequent. The next important aspect of pronunciation training is getting extensive auditory input. It means consuming a lot of content in the accent that you're aspiring to. Remember we talked about how babies form the entire map of the pronunciation of their mother tongue in the first year of their lives just by listening to the language around them. As adults, we're no longer that expert at forming our pronunciation simply by listening, but it still matters a lot. When we retrain to pronounce the sounds of a different language, first, we learn to perceive them. We learn to hear that leave sounds different from live, and food sounds different from foot, and that think and sink, in fact, have different consonants. Only once we've learned to perceive those contrasts can we try and repeat them. Moreover, listening to a lot of speech with the target accent gives you exposure to the prosody of that language. The prosody is basically the melody of speech. It's the rhythm, stress, and intonation of that language. And this aspect proves to be particularly difficult for adults to master, just because the prosody of their mother tongue is so deeply ingrained. But getting this extra exposure to the target accent can really be a great boost and support for your pronunciation training. If you're training for standard Southern British accent and you're not sure what to listen to or what to watch, I have a guide with resources for meaningful exposure to that accent. It includes podcasts, YouTube channel, Instagram profiles, and series. You can get it for free in the description to this video. And the final aspect that I'd like to touch upon is emotional safety. Our psychological state and emotions attached to learning matter more than you might realize. For successful learning to take place, you need to feel safe and comfortable, reducing stress and anxiety as much as possible. There's no place for shame, judgment, or mocking when it comes to pronunciation training. A professional coach would never make you feel embarrassed or ashamed for having an accent, or shame you for making the same mistakes over and over again. Instead, they would offer support and reassurance that it's normal to have an accent or make mistakes. Stress seriously inhibits our capacity for learning and our performance, so be aware that if you find yourself in a stressful situation and your speaking skills suffer, that is completely expectable. But again, the stronger the neural connections are, the less they'll be affected by stress. So I think that's all I've got for you today. Let me know if you liked it, if you have any questions, and if you'd like to see more videos from me. That's actually my very first YouTube video, so let me know if I should go on. My name is Alex, and I'm a pronunciation coach in standard Southern British accent. If you're interested in my pronunciation courses, be sure to check out my website. Thank you for watching.